Today, our topic is attachment. When we talk about attachment, we're talking about the emotional bond between two people. Children's brains develop the foundation of this emotional bond with their primary caregiver between infancy and 3 years of age. We know from research that our human brains thrive on caregivers that are attuned, responsive, coherent, and consistent. This allows us to develop a basic sense of safety, to feel seen, to know we matter, to be able to soothe our nervous systems, and to feel secure enough to learn and grow and explore our world. Many of the young people and many adults in our communities didn't get this in infancy, but this information helps us see this through this lens. These elements of attachment are what our young people need to grow their developing brains. To learn and to thrive, this is a must. Secure attachment is what builds resiliency. The good news is, if at any point a young person, whether in kindergarten, third grade, or even high school, at any point, if they experience a relationship that is attuned, responsive, coherent, and consistent, they too can develop a secure attachment. So let's look more closely at how attachment impacts the brain. When a baby has a physical or emotional need, they cry to let us know they have a need. It's their very first opportunity for self-advocacy. And crying is really the only tool that they have. So when they have this need, their heartbeat gets elevated, and adrenaline and cortisol levels in their body are elevated as well. So their body goes into a state of arousal. And when a caregiver steps in and meets that need, they rock the baby, they change the baby's diaper, maybe feed the baby's body relaxes. The heart rate and chemicals in the body return back to a state of calm. And this lasts for about 30 to 45 seconds until your hair's going gray, you got bags under your eyes, you're exhausted. You parents know what I'm talking about. Of course, the cycle repeats again and again and again. Maybe not that frequently, but some say up to thousands of times in the first couple of years of life. It is through this that infants learn how they are in this world, and they form this basic trust that their needs will be met. This is secure attachment, and it's not conscious. This becomes the lens through which they see everything. The baby's brain is wired in a way that says, I'm okay here. I know I matter. I'm safe. And someone will help me meet my needs. So it's important to know that caregivers don't have to get this 100% of the time. Some say even 30 to 40% is enough to provide that emotional bond, which helps us get to that secure attachment. In contrast, if babies' needs aren't met, or at least their needs aren't met as consistently, their bodies and brains enter and remain in a state of stress for extended periods of time. This means that all that additional cortisol and adrenaline stays in their body and impacts the way that their brains develop. This constant state of emotional distress causes the brain to wire itself for safety and for survival. The child moves through the world with a sense, I don't know if I matter. I can't trust adults to help me. I'm not safe. Some children may even feel if they're invisible. Based on their experience, all of these decisions make sense. Just as with secure attachment, this is not conscious. It develops even before infants have words for it. It's just how they experience the world. And it also impacts how they respond to situations. This is an insecure attachment. And I want to be really clear, this isn't about blaming parents or caregivers. Parents and caregivers love their children, and they're doing the best that they can in the environments that they're in with the tools that they have. Unfortunately, sometimes their environment, their capacity, their capability to respond to that baby's needs isn't there as robustly. And for some, it can be even more challenging if they didn't experience secure attachment when they were a baby. There are foundational skills or building blocks to reach intellectual potential that come from having a secure attachment. Sometimes these building blocks need more time or support to develop because of how the brain is wired in early childhood. We're going to explore some of the ways this might show up for a child at school and notice how our educational system isn't necessarily set up to support the full development of our children. The hopeful news is that our brains are incredibly flexible and adaptable. Secure attachment can be developed at any time in relationship with a caring person. Basic trust. As we discussed earlier, a child with secure attachment will automatically trust adults and assume that their class, their school, is safe. With an insecure attachment, their basic sense of trust is not as solid. Their brain's been wired to be vigilant, to be hyper alert, to notice everything going on around them. And so they're always scanning to make sure that they're safe. And so behavior might look different. It might look a little less predictable. They might not even look like they're paying attention to what's going on. It's because their brain is wired for safety, wired to survive. And so that trust is not always as strong. Causal thinking. Causal thinking is if-then thinking. It can impact both academic learning, reading, writing, math, as well as behavior. So when a student misbehaves, does something unsafe, a challenging behavior, what do we typically give to them? A consequence, right? And this assumes that they're going to make a connection. If I do this unsafe thing, this wrong thing, this bad thing, I'm going to get this consequence, so I better not do it. Unfortunately, for our kids that have been exposed to trauma or adverse experiences or have an insecure attachment, they don't necessarily get the connection. If I do this, then this happens. So what do they do the next day when they come back? They do it again, right? So what do? We give them another consequence, or we up the consequence. Because if they didn't feel it the first time, it must not have been the right consequence. So we have to really make them feel it so they won't do it again, so that they'll learn from their mistake. Unfortunately, this doesn't necessarily work from what we know about how brains are developed, especially kids that have been exposed to trauma. And this is based on this deep cultural belief that in order to learn, you have to have an impact. And when it comes to behavior, that impact has to hurt. You have to feel it. So, based on what we know about teaching by hurting, it doesn't make sense for our students' brains. It doesn't make sense for how their brains work. So we may see some short-term changes, but especially for our students with insecure attachment or trauma, it doesn't work long-term. So we know from our data that continuing to push kids out of the classroom and out of our schools has huge, profound impacts, negative impacts on their life prospects. It's the school-to-prison pipeline. Today's workshop and trauma-informed practice overall offers a framework to think about student accountability differently. Does this mean that we just let kids do whatever they want? No. Permissiveness is not helpful. We need to have boundaries. It does mean we need to find ways to hold young people accountable for repairing the harm and for finding solutions to their problems. This allows them to have voice, to empower them, and take responsibility for fixing their mistakes. Through this process, they can develop causal thinking. Children with insecure attachment have a challenge delaying gratification. So if adults' responses in your world were unreliable, then you need to get what you can get when you can get it. So this might be one of the students in your class who, when you give directions to the class, everyone take one item, they might take 5. It might be a snack or something. They're going to take what they can get when they can get it because they're not sure that they are going to have another chance. Again, it's a brain built for survival. For us, as the adult, as a teacher, we might see this as disrespect, defiance, but for them, they're solving a problem that we can't see. The ability to handle stress. We all have a baseline where our nervous systems are most relaxed. And then we all have our lose it line where we may flip our lid, react, do something that we wish we hadn't done. Throughout the day, we have our ups and downs. We spill our coffee, we get cut off in traffic, And then something happens that really causes us to lose it. We might explode, we might blow up on someone, or we might just totally withdraw and hold something in that we and later wish we would have said. For our young people that have been exposed to adversity or have adverse environmental factors or insecure attachment, their baseline is really close to that lose it line. We often talk about kids who go from 0 to 60 in like 2.8 seconds. Actually, for our kids that have been exposed to adversity or insecure attachment, they're going from 50 to 60 in 2.8 seconds. So their baseline is much higher than some of their peers. And it seems to be out of nowhere. When a student flips their lid and maybe does something unsafe, we might send them to the office. And if they aren't allowed to get fully back to their baseline and they get sent back again, all it takes is for someone to give them a look or their teacher to kind of not look so excited to see them, and boom, they flip their lid again because they weren't all the way to their baseline. So we call that space between the baseline and their lose it line the resiliency window. The perspective shift we're inviting is, instead of thinking, how do I change this behavior? Think, how do I open up the resiliency window? Bigger resiliency windows set students up for success. Children have access to their best selves when they are most regulated. Heart rate is a tool that we can use to recognize stress levels. So for those of you that can measure heart rate, maybe with a pulse oximeter, this is a great way of tracking stress. After a child flips their lid and thinks that they're ready to return back to learning, have them take their pulse. And if they're not fully back to their baseline, back to their resting heart rate, invite them to do a self-regulation activity, to do something that will calm their bodies. Being back to their baseline means the student has the most space in that resiliency window and the best chance of being able to engage in that learning community. Relationship skills and socialization. These can be tough, especially when a student can't self-regulate very well. And they may respond to stress by flying off the handle pretty quickly or losing it with their friends, maybe being a little unpredictable. This can cause students to have a hard time with relationships and being social with others. It might also explain why students might do well in the safe environment of the classroom where they know the routines and they have predictable schedules, but when they get out to the playground or into the cafeteria where it's a little more chaotic and unstructured, they struggle. Some of our students may misinterpret other people's actions and have a hard time with friendships. So explicit teaching and plenty of practice learning how to read social cues, how to take turns, how to communicate with each other, how to problem solve. All these can help stretch that window so that we can impart new skills within this area. Concentration. Students with an insecure attachment are wired for survival, and so they're always taking in everything around them. They're always on high alert. Because they're paying attention to so many different things, they may not be paying attention to you up at the front of the classroom with your wonderful lesson, or they may not be paying attention to the work that's right in front of them. It can actually frequently look like ADD or ADHD. As an educator committed to helping each student reach their intellectual potential, even their human potential, it can be really disheartening to learn that even though that child may have really great potential, it's going to take more for them to reach it because of all the barriers that are in their way. Foundational building blocks are not yet fully developed in all children. Unfortunately, our school system expects teachers to work on academics and help students reach their intellectual potential, but often ignores the importance of putting time and resources into building those foundational blocks. So it's not important for us to diagnose how many ACEs a student may have or whether they have insecure attachment. As educators, our job is to have a lens on behavior that allows us to see the student as doing the best that they can with the tools that they have access to in that moment. Some of our students may come to our spaces with their building blocks pretty intact, and some may come with them really jumbled. Educators have an opportunity to help students develop these lagging skills in relationship with them or with their peers in the classroom. Understanding attachment and the impact it has on growing brains and student behavior is the background for our second session of reimagining resilience using a trauma lens. We will explore more tools for building relationship and establishing connection. Thank you so much for your time and your supporting young people in their journey to reach their full potential and their best selves.